mind bend. Non-ordinary and extraordinary states of consciousness for mind bend creative.
So, Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on to the show. It was great to hear about your book. Congratulations on getting it out. Ecstasy as Medicine just came out in October. Is that correct?
That's correct. About 2 months old now, something like that.
Yeah. So you've put out other books before. How is this book different? I know this is a lifelong, from reading the book, this is a lifelong endeavor to work with MDMA from a therapeutic point of view, on a personal and ceremonial point of view. Talk to us about what it took to actually make this book happen.
Well, I got my master's thesis on the therapeutic effects of MDMA on PTSD back in 1984, and then the US government made it illegal. So I've done 40 years of underground MDMA therapy. I am a psychotherapist. And I just wanted to put all my wisdom into one book, what I've learned in helping people with trauma, anxiety, depression, helping couples. I've led maybe 800 journeys. And I now teach the largest course in the world on how to do MDMA therapy. So I have a lot of experience. And you probably know, Matthew, that the FDA is going to likely make MDMA a medically prescribed medicine in 2024. So there's going to be a lot of people want to know how to do this. And I figure a book about it would be a good time to put it out there. And also, I have a different approach than what most people are using. You're probably familiar with MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. A lot of the studies have been done how to do this therapy where they put a blindfold on somebody and have them listen to music to see if it cures trauma, and it does. But the only reason they did this is they wanted to get FDA approval. It's called the Food and Drug Administration. It's not called the Food and Therapy Administration. So a lot of people just followed their protocol. And I wanted to actually do therapy with this drug, not just, put a blindfold and listen to music. And you find out that it gets much better results that way. So I wanted to put out this form of the therapy rather than the one that MAPS was using.
Got it. Yeah. So, the book is really interesting in that it gives you a sneak peek or a peek or a look into process and protocol. As a practitioner, as a psychotherapist, you lay out in very candid detail the steps that your processes involve. So if I was a client and I was looking to make an appointment with you or a comparable practitioner, this gives you a sense of what you could expect from a session like this. And one of the things you talked about in the book too is pandemic, everything goes to Zoom, everything is in isolation, everything is remote. What a trip, right? I mean, we're still reeling from that psychologically, spiritually. What a wild thing that we've kind of just immediately moved on from. But it did open up a reality for you. And I like one of the things that you make sure to spend time on mentioning in the book is the set and setting and the sense of safety for someone who's participating in a session like this, where they're not coming into your territory. They are working with you in your territory while they're in their territory and their safe space, hopefully, with someone nearby. And that's kind of facilitated by this necessary online engagement. And it is very different than most of the recorded clinical trials that people are aware of in terms of how treatment is administered.
Yeah. For those who didn't quite get it, I do almost all my sessions over Zoom now. And that started with the pandemic. I thought, this probably can't work. But I tried it and it worked amazing. And then I kept on doing it. And I've done maybe 500 sessions in person and maybe 300 over Zoom. And the ones over Zoom actually go better. And this surprised everybody, including Rick Doblin of MAPS. Like, what? You can do this over Zoom? Nobody ever thought of that. Well, it works significantly better. And the reason I think has to do with what you said, like it creates a total safety. People are in their own home, they're relaxed. People on MDMA don't have a hard time looking at a computer screen for several hours. It just creates like the perfect setting. And instead of needing to do several sessions as MAPS does with their clients, I find that I can cure people of almost anything in one session. That's not always the case, but it is the case probably 90% of the time. And it's also a hell of a lot more convenient for everybody.
Just the fact that you can say confidently that people can be cured from something that they consider to be an ailment, an illness, an impediment to happiness, I think that alone speaks volumes to the capacity of human beings to right the ship, right?
Yeah.
Like, psychedelics and medicine are tools that can be used to tap into the latent promise and power of a human being, right? And I'm a musician primarily. Music is my craft and love, and I've dedicated most of my life to making music and journalism and creating content and filmmaking. My fantasy job would be a psychotherapist or a psychologist because I think it's so amazing to think about bridging that space between your and someone else's psyche with the intention of helping them. What a beautiful way to have a vocation in life, to come to people and to help them be better and to fuse with them on a psychological level, spiritual level. So I'm envious in a way of like, your life path, and congratulations. That's but it's really neat because as a journalist in this space, the conversations I have with myself over time about the nature of reality and how much happiness can I expect from myself and what should I expect from my daily interactions with others and what do I want to get from this life and what am I putting into this life? These are important questions, and I feel like since we don't take care of mental health in the same way that we take care of elbows and appendixes in America, it's a rare opportunity that I think more people would benefit from. One of the things that always throws me is when clinicians, practitioners like yourself, talking about psychedelics refer to the ability of psychedelic therapy to accomplish in one session what couldn't be done in 1 year. My first thought is to kind of bristle at comments like that because I feel like they're potentially problematic. If for no other reason, then it seems a little condescending to kind of diminish the work that somebody could put into actually showing up for a psychotherapist or making that effort themselves. And I would hate to make anybody feel stupid before they've had a chance to like take their effort to heal to another level, perhaps through psychedelics. I know that's not the intention. The intention is to say tremendous things are possible. But let's dig into that comment a little bit more. I mean, if you've gone to a psychotherapist one time a week and you've paid out of pocket for it potentially, that's a tremendous commitment. And hopefully you find somebody that you trust and that you believe can really help you. And then you have this idea of all that being obliterated through one session. How are you able to make that kind of comment?
Well, luckily I've been a psychotherapist for over 40 years. So what I'm always looking for is what's the most effective thing you can do in the shortest period of time. The world is changing so fast and we're all subject to so much stress nowadays that we need the best technologies. People don't use dial-up phones or rotary phones now. We need the best technology to stay in tune with making a living. But we also need the best technologies for finding peace, for finding spiritual connection, for finding love, for getting over trauma. And, not many people are doing psychoanalysis anymore, which was come to the psychiatrist 3 times a week and talk about your mother. Nobody's doing that anymore. It was shown to be incredibly ineffective. Well, it ends up normal psychotherapy is also very ineffective, meaning that you go for 2-3 years and it helps a little bit. Well, we don't live in an age where that works for many people. If there's a better technology, such as MDMA therapy, and it works, then I say go with the best technology rather than go with what doesn't work that well. It ends up, besides MDMA being a breakthrough drug, that people actually have an easier time changing quickly than they do slowly. When you go to a therapist week after week, you never have to change. It becomes like going to the gym. It's just part of your life. There's never, you're changing today, buddy. If you're taking heroin, yeah, you can talk about your childhood, but that's not going to get you off heroin. You need some other force to like shake you. And if you want to heal from trauma, the same thing. The reason the FDA is going to make this a medically prescribed drug is that there's no good treatment for trauma. MDMA comes along, they go, oh my God, this cures people if you just put a blindfold and listen to music. So when you do that and you do therapy on it, it's that much better. So I make a lot more money as a therapist than as an MDMA therapist. If I can string somebody along for 4 years, that's a lot more money than doing it in one day. But I say people need the quick, effective fix rather than the non-effective, long-term, let's take several years fix. But people are different. There are some people who are going to prefer the other one, and that's fine too. You really have to find what works for you. But this is a new technology. I think it's a breakthrough if you do therapy on MDMA. And it's not that complicated either. I've trained now hundreds, if not thousands, of therapists, coaches, people like you to do this therapy. And I don't require that they be a therapist because I find that you really just have to be curious, ask people questions, know 2 or 3 therapeutic methods that are really effective. And you can have that experience of like, wow, I just transformed somebody's life in a day. And that's a really good feeling.
You get into the nitty gritty, which I appreciate, the mechanisms at work during a session. And a lot of it has to do with obviously, but it has to do with your trial and error, your work over time, your understanding language, how to help someone's brain and spirit comprehend what's going on. So let's talk about the mechanism at work during the session. We are looking at moments of concern or moments of sickness or realities of sickness or illness in a person. We're looking at them as a team with the patient and the practitioner, and we're doing it where the patient is physiologically, they're different. In the moment of being on the medicine, things are different for a number of neurological, first and foremost, reasons, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about if I'm stressed out, if I come home stressed out and I think about a sick relative, then I'm going to feel worse. That's just a basic way of looking at it. If I'm feeling empowered, confident, at peace, and I consider that troubling thought, it's going to be a different outcome, or I'm going to feel differently in that process. So
yeah,
these tools, these medicines allow for the contemplation, the consideration, and the evaluation of aspects of people's lives while they are now all of a sudden predisposed to being able to think of them differently. And I want to get to some more points that you talked about later, but not only think about them differently, but approach them and work with them so as to diffuse them and heal from them in these sessions.
Yeah, that's true. And once you see something clearly that about yourself or about your life, and you see it soberly, clearly, without your defense mechanisms, you can't unsee it. And one of the things I do is I also try to take the insights. I record the sessions, or they record the sessions so that they can listen to it. But I have a big emphasis on integration too, because you want to take the insights that they learn and then put them somehow into their daily life. So I was a motivational speaker besides a psychotherapist, and I created some motivational methods that allow people to stay consistently motivated. So it's a whole system of get people to see stuff that was an obstacle to their peace, an obstacle to their being a good partners, for example, and then find a way to integrate their new habits into their daily life, which is a system that is very effective. And I find that it's also very satisfying for people to have hope that something actually can change in their life. And of course, I enjoy it as well because it's very satisfying to help people.
Absolutely. I want to look at the word ecstasy. The drug, the medicine itself is MDMA, and it's known as ecstasy. And ecstasy is in the title of the book. And just ecstasy alone, linguistically, there's almost, I mean, depending on where you're from, it almost seems like one of those words that you're not worthy of. Like ecstasy is like, oh, well, that's reserved for like, the highest level of accomplishment, or that's the biggest treat you can get, or there's almost something racy about the term ecstasy itself. It almost seems overindulgent. Sure, you can expect to maybe feel good or have a good time, but to have an ecstatic time, that's something different. What do you think about the term ecstasy when you refer to this medicine?
Well, it was actually called Ecstasy because one of the early trips, the guy was listening to a song called Ecstasy by a guy named Duder. That was the reason why it was called Ecstasy. It really, its feeling is more one of deep peace and love than ecstasy. But, at least it indicates that you're going to have a good time. Whereas with a lot of other drugs, people have hard times. In the 800 journeys I've led, only one person had a hard time where they said that was really challenging. So it's nice to have a drug where you're pretty sure you're going to feel really good. And once people know what feeling really good and open feels like, because some people don't, it's easier to hit that target again. And you might know, Matthew, my other interests and books have been largely about enlightenment.
Yeah.
I've interviewed everybody from the late Mother Teresa to the Dalai Lama. And a lot of these people do live in a state of ecstasy all the time. It is, our hopes have been like, let's try and get through the day. But really, it is possible for human beings to reach very lofty states of consciousness, and MDMA kind of mimics that.
Yeah. Well, one of the anecdotes you gave in the book is traveling to India to receive the mantra of thank you and incorporating that into your life. And, I do think that is a tool that can be part of integration, that can be part of a daily approach to life and curating more elevated states of consciousness, happier or more ecstatic states of consciousness. I've got a number of questions I want to make sure I have a chance to cover.
Sure.
A lot of people who have familiarity with ecstasy, when I first started to hear about ecstasy, it was kids doing raves, and I never did. But we know that there's a lot of use of and as you point out in the book, it's dubious as to whether or not what's actually being taken is pure MDMA or whether it's cut with any number of things, right, to elicit a similar response. But, in the public consciousness, for people who, I don't know how much it still is at play anyway, but for people who think of, okay, I've heard of that. Yes, I associate that with this pop culture awareness of it. But not everybody's walking around healed. Not everybody that went to a rave in 1993 is enlightened now, and they probably went to like 60 or 70 raves, and they're not necessarily enlightened. But I always am looking for this analogy or this metaphor, and you summed it up really nicely in the book about using a laptop as a door jamb, right? Like
laptop as a doorstop.
As a doorstop, laptop as a doorstop. So you take something and you use it either optimally or not optimally.
Yeah, I mean, diamonds can be used to scrub toilets, but there's better uses for diamonds. Laptops can be used as a doorstop, but there's better uses for that. MDMA can be used as a dance party drug, and there are also much better uses for MDMA. And a lot of the people who've taken MDMA in raves and then they take it therapeutically, they're just like, oh my God, I had no idea that this could do this. And, dancing and having a good time is fine, but this is a breakthrough medicine for being able to cure yourself of lifelong psychological challenges. And unless you've used it in a therapeutic context, you might not be aware of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you alluded to this earlier, and there's more talk of it in the book too, but there can be challenges that come either in the session or in recovery from the session, because what happens during the administration and the processing of the medicine is a significant physiological phenomenon. And there is a recovery window afterwards. And like you said, everybody's different. People have different sensitivities. I can barely drink coffee. In fact, I don't take any caffeine because I'm hypersensitive. So that's a plant medicine, right? But that will affect me emotionally different than it does in 99% of my peers. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the process of being drained, or you're rushed with serotonin and then the system has to recover. And you've outlined some methodologies for augmenting that recovery process, or if you don't want to call it recovery process, just kind of whatever, getting back to homeostasis or some kind of agreeable, like, physiological point. But talk a little bit about where there have been challenges, to paint an honest picture here, because it's different. The protocols that you've outlined for helping ensure that the process from start to finish, which means leading up to the day before the ceremony, and then, or the session, and then the days afterwards, can be optimized.
Yeah. Well, as you know, set and setting is very important. Drinking a normal amount of water with electrolytes during the session is good. Taking a magnesium supplement to deal with the side effects of like a tight jaw is important. But I go into a lot of depth about 8 things you can do after the session that mitigate negative after effects. About 1/3 of people have a challenging time the next day. And yet, if they take the right supplements, which I outline in the book, usually that is much less or eliminated. And it's important that people know what those supplements are, what those activities are. Also, in recent research, they found that when people get pure MDMA, only about 3% of people have a hard time the next day. So a lot of the difficulties people are having following, quote, MDMA sessions is that they're not getting pure MDMA.
Another term that I'd like to get your further take on is freak out, because that's a term that gets thrown around, but I don't think we really often dig into what exactly constitutes a freak out. What's happening when we say freak out? Most of us know what you're talking about, but from a medical point of view, what's really going on?
Well, there's, quote, 2 types of freakouts. One would be psychological and one would be more physiological. Of the 800 journeys, I've never dealt with a psychological freakout. That's much more common with psychedelics like psilocybin, LSD, DMT, etc. But you do get maybe 1% of people dealing with a very challenging physiological time with the drug. That's only 1 out of 100, but you do want to know what to do with that. And that generally looks like, purging, vomiting during the drug. And if you do that 2 or 3 times, the person is having a really hard physical time. Of course, there's simple things you can do at that time, like, drink Gatorade. That seems to help a lot, or any electrolyte water. Ginger tea works. It's pretty rare, but you want to be prepared for anything. And in the classes I teach, I let people know how to handle those things. There's also, though, some contraindications for MDMA, meaning, if you have extremely high blood pressure, you don't want to take it. If you are on antidepressants, it's usually not a good idea because it works on the same neural pathway and you won't actually feel the MDMA. So there's a lot to know. And that's why I wrote the book, because I couldn't find any book that actually gave all this practical information. And with the medically legalizing of MDMA this year, a lot of people are going to be, oh, well, let's do that again, or let's try that therapy. And I wanted to make sure that the best information was out there, and so that people can avoid these potential problems.
Yeah. Being sick physiologically can be very unsettling psychologically and emotionally. Anybody who's had a flu knows that.
Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully some of those potential outcomes can be mitigated with responsible planning and action during the session and afterwards. Wanted to ask you another question about healing versus expansion of wellness. You know, there's in the time that I've been looking at the psychedelic space and talking to people about different medicines and different techniques and different setting opportunities. Are we talking about human optimization, or are we talking about recovery from wounding? And where do they meet, and what's the difference? You know, like somebody could be interested in trying MDMA, but they might not be the type of person that contemplates something that is of consistent and painful contemplation throughout their lives. You know? So what's the difference there from like a clinical medical point of view? Like, I want to try MDMA. I want to see what it feels like. I have these thoughts that I can't shake, and I want to try to heal from them.
Yeah, that's a great question. But, you know, think of it like an airplane has two wings, and they need to be the same size in order for that airplane to soar. So there's the psychological healing wing, you know, which a lot of people want to do on MDMA. And then there's the expanded consciousness, deeper peace and love wing. And MDMA is like a Swiss Army knife. It can work on both. Now, usually in an initial Zoom session, I find out what people want to work on and what they would like. But I think it's important to work on your weak wing, let's say, meaning that, you know, if you've never dealt with serious trauma in your life, you know, it might be good to look at that. But if you also have dealt with that a bunch, you might want to look at how to use MDMA to help teach you how to have more love, joy, and peace in your life. Now, there are different methods to focus on each of those. And one of the things that's been really fun is to teach people how to have deep peace and open up to love without the medicine. You know, once you've experienced that, you can see, I help people see the breadcrumb trail back to that without the medicine, because I think the greatest thing you can do for somebody is to teach them how to open up their own heart, open up to more peace, and that they can then do that when they want. That changes a person's life. So I do put a big emphasis on that, both in the book and in the sessions and in the courses I teach.
Why is MDMA considered a psychedelic? What is psychedelic about MDMA?
Well, it's not, you know, you don't hallucinate or do any of those things. Basically, psychedelic, you might know this, it means like mind expanding or mind
manifesting.
Mind manifesting. You know, it was just, you know, they have all these drugs, people take them for different reasons. They just say, well, let's put that in a psychedelic category, but it doesn't really fit so much with the other quote psychedelics, other than it does manifest a different mind than you're used to, and it was more really for convenience.
You mentioned in the book a little bit about other classic psychedelics too, and how those experiences are different. LSD, psilocybin, magic mushroom, 5-MeO-DMT, for example. And you've had experience with 5-MeO-DMT yourself and worked with others who have as well. For my own curiosity, and to put you on the spot here too, in the book it's described as indescribable. But what makes the experience so indescribable, and how might an indescribable experience be further described?
Ah, yes. Well, for those who haven't had it, one way of looking at it is that our mind is always creating and interpreting reality. Physicists will tell us that we're actually 99.99% empty space, that everything's vibration, everything is energy. But we don't see the world that way. Well, on 5-MeO DMT, you do kind of get into a world of pure vibration, pure energy, separate from your mind's concepts. And that's a unique experience for people. So I would describe it as quickly entering into a world beyond human mind conceptualization and into frequency, energy, and vibration that I would say is a more direct experience of what you could call reality or God or consciousness.
But it is still being witnessed through something that can be vaguely recognized as yourself.
Yeah, I mean, there is a point of view. You actually can take, if you take a lot of 5-MeO DMT, you do have what's called whiteout, where you aren't aware of what's going on. It's like being asleep, but you're in such an expanded consciousness that your focal sense of you does disappear. Eventually that comes back. And when it comes back, you're witnessing energy, vibration, frequency from a state of more just pure awareness.
Thank you for digging a little deeper into that. I appreciate the effort there.
Uh-huh.
The mocking movie method.
Uh-huh.
It's very fascinating to me because I used to read Adbusters magazine, and I've always liked the idea of culture jamming, and just kind of, and we see that more and more. I think we're seeing a lot of culture jamming subtly through like memes and GIFs, and uh, I think we've tapped into collective consciously, um, that sort of like needle skip on the record kind of like fascination. A lot of these things are showing like the mundane to be hackable or to be
Mm-hmm.
slightly altered. So this idea of hacking language or hacking recollection was fascinating to me to read about that in the book. The mocking movie method to essentially replay the event. This is an example of it, right? To replay an event from your life, but to see it and to project upon it these variables that have never been there before. For instance, going through a painful memory, but giving the antagonist Mickey Mouse ears or a Mickey Mouse voice, or, it was fascinating to me. And I immediately started to do that on my own on the
Mm-hmm.
couch, going into a moment and like remixing it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Talk to us more about the mocking movie method and this idea of focusing on a moment differently so that the next time it comes to mind, you're going to automatically be drawn to the more absurdist elements of it, as opposed to the more what once was personal and painful moments of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, the idea behind this method was it's a great way to neutralize traumatic memories. I've had women who were raped 30 years ago who are still replaying that horrible experience. They come to me, and in 5 minutes, I use this method, and it like takes the memory and destroys it. It just obliterates or neutralizes it. And they can't believe how effective it is. It's even more effective when done on MDMA. But the idea is like, if I tell you, think of anything, Matthew, except for a pink elephant, think of anything in the world except for a pink elephant. Well, you can't not think of a pink elephant. So when you give the brain a choice between a terrible memory and a ridiculous, absurd memory, it will choose the ridiculous and absurd. So having people play with a memory, such as giving everybody Mickey Mouse ears, a bozo nose, having circus music going, really playing with that memory in an absurd way, it neutralizes it very quickly so that a person no longer feels the trauma or the challenge of that memory the way that they did before. So there's a lot of methods that work somewhat well in therapy. And then if somebody's on ecstasy or MDMA, they work like ridiculously well. And people can notice like, oh, this memory, which made me so uptight and was scary, now I smile as I think about it. That's a pretty amazing result to get in 5 minutes.
Absolutely. It's fascinating. And do you recommend, are there ways that this kind of strategy can be employed outside of the session as well?
Sure. All those things I describe in the book, so people can do it on themselves. It's easier to do it with somebody guiding you. But doing a extremely great method mediocrely is still quite effective. Even if you don't have a Tesla, your average car will get you there pretty quickly.
True. Want to talk to you about one of my least favorite combinations of words, which is chemical imbalance in the brain. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're talking, there's a section in the book where you're talking about MDMA as used for marital counseling, as used for anxiety disorders, as used for depression. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about, examples from your own life too, your own, personal examples from your childhood and adolescence. So I was diagnosed with depression by rather hastily, I think. I feel like I was a very intelligent and loving and empathetic person, and I had things happen in my life that were hard to posit, and I wanted intelligent people to speak to them about. And when you're 17, 18, 19, you're not always around immediately wise people, intelligent people, and people that can hold space or help you process through fucked up things, right? So they threw medicine on me. Now, I was willing to accept that a doctor who I've always gone to for every other physiological or spiritual or emotional concern, that what they've identified as a chemical imbalance in the brain. And hey, some people have diabetes, some people have seizures, some people have chemical imbalances in the brain. So I was able to take antidepressant medication and not rake myself over the coals about it. Whatever my thoughts were at the time back in the day, I wasn't hard on myself about thinking that there was something that I needed to be more whole, to be more myself, to be less sick, right? But no physician has ever been able to show me my chemical imbalance in my brain. No one's ever been able to put that on an X-ray screen or give me an EKG or anything to indicate that. But it is you do cite a chemical imbalance of the brain as one reason why somebody could be depressed. So I have to take you to task on this also. What the fuck are we talking about when we talk about a chemical imbalance in the brain, especially with what's come out recently about how serotonin may not be the prime mover in the whole issue of neurological depression to begin with? That is such a troubling phrase for me. So help me understand, what are we talking about, chemical imbalance in the brain?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say I'm not a big believer in that philosophy or that way of looking at things. And there's been recent studies that show that that the whole notion of chemical imbalance is at least highly exaggerated, if not completely erroneous. So I tend to agree with you, although, there's many different neurotransmitters in the brain. And some people at some times will have one or more neurotransmitters that are kind of out of whack. Now, it's actually hard to find that out. You have to take some expensive tests to find that out. Um, and and I have known people that just don't have enough dopamine. They take a dopamine supplement and they feel much better. So I would call that the chemical imbalance. It's really better would be to say a neurotransmitter imbalance. That would be more accurate. But I think that is not the best way to look at these things. I know a lot about depression, having been depressed as a child and a teenager. And I think that there's a lot of different approaches. Some are much more effective than others. Unfortunately, Big Pharma found a way to sell Americans, oh, take a pill for this, quote, chemical imbalance, and you'll feel better. Studies show that antidepressants are basically just expensive placebos for about 90% of people. So, but they make billions of dollars, so they advertise them. And that's why I think it's important that there be new technologies that show that, like MDMA, that show that you can actually have whole new approaches that work much better.
So let's segue then. Thank you for that. Let's segue into economies of scale here and talk about the marketplace, the manufacturers, the accessibility.
Uh-huh.
So in the book, you mentioned that I think the price tag expected around what could look like what the MDMA, what the MAPS protocols have looked like if you were to receive that in real life this year, next year, in 5 years, whatever. I don't know. The number I saw was $10,000. Like, and I think that's a very specific protocol. But maybe that was a ballpark of what that price tag could kind of be.
Yeah, the lower ballpark, 10 to 15,000.
Okay, and that specifically is the 3-session model with 2 facilitators.
Yeah.
And then and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the $500 was what you discussed with Rick Doblin as being the 1 session, maybe done online with the lead up to it and then the integration afterwards.
Yeah. My goal has been to make this therapy accessible to a lot of people. Not many people have $15,000 to spend on therapy. So, I do this training. If people want to find out about it, it's mdmatraining.net. And I train hundreds of people to do this training. And my goal has been to get people to help people for somewhere between $500 and $1,500. And that involves, about 8 hours of their time. And that makes it available to millions of people versus thousands of people. And it's also, in my opinion, more effective than the MAPS training, although I can't prove that because that would take $20 million in 20 years. But by teaching a lot of therapists, coaches, healers, people like yourself, how to do this therapy, no reason people need to make $700 an hour. If a person's making $200 an hour, helping somebody transform their life, I think that's a pretty good deal. So that's been my mission. And the class is doing well. People seem to really like it. And when it does become medically prescribed medicine this year, then I want to make sure that people who want this therapy can do it without breaking the bank.
Do you, in your professional life, have the opportunity to be around policymakers and influential people that can help shape this landscape for mass accessibility in our country specifically? Are you talking to movers and shakers at that level, and what might those conversations sound like?
I do have some access. and of course, I'm in touch with Rick Doblin at MAPS and other people, lawyers, politicians, a little bit. I thought putting the book out there was probably be the best thing, and also some of these people are taking my course, because they want to see how I am avoiding some of the problems that happen. But luckily Australia made it legal last year, and they are working through some of these issues. And the same thing's happening state by state level, with psilocybin, Oregon, Colorado. How do you work with these new medicines in a way that reduces potential harm and increases their therapeutic potential? It's going to be an ongoing process, and I'm sure we'll make some mistakes, but hopefully it will move in a good direction.
I want to, and I respect your time, and I appreciate your time coming on today. I'll conclude shortly, but I want to go over this appropriately. At the conclusion of your book, there's a quote from Emily Dickinson. It says, "Find ecstasy in life. The mere sense of living is joy enough." The way I hear that quote is, if you're fortunate to have the kind of mind, body, spirit connection that can allow you to view life as a joyful gift and experience that's fascinating, to abide in gratitude, to abide in a mentality of thankfulness. If your friends aren't being blown up around you at the moment, I mean, that's the world we live in. Everybody knows that. We're on our own personal jag to heal, evolve, love others more robustly, love ourselves adequately. And all of the news is everything that's in the news about the inhumanity and the absolute ravaging of each other and the planet. And so it's just a fucked up juxtaposition always to try to be happy and to be aware. I mean, it's crazy, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so, how much joy is reasonable? How much happiness is reasonable? What are human beings supposed to be walking around like Eckhart Tolle on the park bench with his mind blown about how everything is sublime and enjoy in myself? Or, what is the goal? What is a reasonable expectation for happiness?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Well, I think for most people, the happier they are, the more peace that they can tune into, the kingdom of heaven within, Buddha nature, whatever you want to call it, the more effective you can be. I live in a state of a lot of joy and peace and love a lot of the time. And that has allowed me to be much more effective than when I was depressed, cynical, and hopeless. So they don't need to be mutually exclusive. Now, there are some people who will do what's called spiritual bypassing, where they just are in la la land and they don't do anything in the world. But there's a balance of tapping into I asked 100 spiritual leaders what the purpose of human life is. And they all said the same thing. They said, the purpose of human life is to learn to tap into the love and peace within yourself. And then from that feeling of abundance, go out and help people. And I do believe that MDMA and meditation and other things can be a very powerful technology. And that if you're anxious, depressed, and hopeless, or focusing on how terrible things are, you're not going to be very effective in changing things. So it's important that you really invest in your ability to connect with these higher states of consciousness, so that you can have the energy and the persistence to help out other people in the world situation.
I want to leave you an opportunity just to let our audience know any last thing that they should know straight from your mouth today before we conclude.
Well, they can learn a lot of useful stuff that I give away for free at my website, xtcasmedicine.com. How to avoid bad psychedelic trips, how to connect instantly with people, and some other free stuff. And if they want to know how to do this type of therapy, they can go to mdmatraining.net. And I have another training starting in March. And, I say in a turbulent time like we have, we need the best, fastest, easiest ways to help us overcome our challenges and tap into peace and love. And I think that it's a gift to humanity that this medicine is now becoming available and can help transform a lot of people's lives and give them new hope.
The book is Ecstasy as Medicine. Jonathan Robinson is the author and has been my guest today. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. A joy to speak with you, a joy to read the book, and appreciate your time very much.
Great questions, Matthew. I really enjoyed it.